I'm Dan Carell, CEO of the Digital Commerce Alliance, and this is Commerce Code, a bi-weekly digital commerce podcast for leaders in card linking, loyalty and digital marketing, mobile wallets and payments, and financial data. Thanks for joining this running conversation with leaders in the industry. And if you like this podcast, come join us at a Digital Commerce Alliance event. You can learn more at www.digcomall.org. This week, I'm talking with James Trocmé from Points for Purpose. Points for Purpose is a pioneer in cause-related marketing, transforming consumer rewards into charitable gifts and giving consumers control over their rewards through card-linked offer technology. James is a deep subject matter expert in the digital commerce space, and I just wanted to get James on the show to unpack the history, the mechanics, some of the particulars of coupons and offers, points, how all of that evolved into an ecosystem that nowadays can support something as complex and something as variable as what Points for Purpose is able to offer. So we're going to go deep with James. We'll start with paper coupons in the aisles of an IGA 40 years ago and work our way through to today's card-linked, app-based, and then otherwise, whatever comes next kind of environment for digital commerce. So all of that and more after the break. And then after that, we have a brief postscript on the shopping mall. To paraphrase those who like to almost quote Mark Twain, it seems that reports of the shopping mall's death are greatly exaggerated.
Commerce Code is sponsored by Pentadata, the all-in-one financial data API. Whether it is bank account data, credit card transaction data, or credit reports and credit scores, Pentadata has it all in one simple and easy-to-use API. With coverage of over 6,000 banks, over 200 million credit files, and 60 million merchants, you can get all the data you need for your apps at pentadatainc.com.
Okay, well, we are joined by James Trocmé as the Chief Operating Officer of Points for Purpose in North America. And Points for Purpose has just launched recently, although probably a couple of months ago now, James, in North America. And so we're pleased to have you as part of DCA and pleased to have you here for the conversation today about kind of from the basics to what's going on in consumer engagement and consumer rewards. Where are you joining us from?
I am currently in Florida because I am supporting a cause dear and near to me. I'm taking care of my 88-year-old aunt, and so I'm normally out of Cleveland, but for the time being, I am in Florida.
Excellent. Well, that's good. And, it's August is maybe not as crowded. I don't know if this is true. Is August a little less crowded in Florida? It would seem to me that that's not the main month when people say, hey, let's go.
It's not the main month, but people who live here are busy up and about, so there's still pretty much the same regular traffic that you would expect anywhere else.
There you go. Florida's a popular place. Well, look, as you and I have talked in advance of this, and we're going to dive in and really kind of talk from some of the basics to some of the more interesting kind of ongoing current things that are happening in consumer rewards and consumer engagement. But I just want to start at the basics, right? Which is, it's ubiquitous now, right? We redeem discounts, points, rewards, but sometimes we're a little fuzzy about how it all works. And so I want to start here. If we go back a few decades, and I'll use in my case to when I was a kid, so now we're talking 4 decades, to the IGA grocery store, my mom's walking around with a paper coupon from, the Toronto Star for 20% off Maxwell House coffee. In that scenario, who paid what to who on that exactly in order to get that stuff to happen?
Yeah, so the old-fashioned couponing, which has worked well and still works for many things, is the couponing is usually paid for by the product manufacturer or supplier. And in this case, you really have to figure out whether that product is of interest to the consumer. So today, newspapers play a lesser role, but back in the day, people, spent a lot of time clipping coupons, and some people still do. I think is a sort of a generation gap in this respect. And then evolved towards direct mail. And again, it's the product and services suppliers who pay for this to have their products promoted at retail outlets. Again, it really looks, you get these mailers in your inbox at home and you look through them and there are a bunch of coupons in there and most of them are probably not relevant to most people today, so they end up in the trash. So that's what's happening now with this type of reward program. And it's not particularly tailored by the retailer itself or by a card issuer. It really is done by the brands that are trying to promote their products.
And the accounting that happened on the back end of that, and again, it's 1979, right? It's Maxwell House and the IGA and Toronto Star, all that stuff. I mean, the accounting on the back end has to be that the IGA needs to, I guess, aggregate all the different coupons they've got so that they're not the ones that take the 20% hit. They push it back up the chain to the brand, and then the brand somehow probably credits their account or something like that.
Correct. There is a back office process, which is in the case of paper coupons, manual. So you have to go through that and process that. But it evolved over time because now with the QR codes and barcodes, et cetera, you're able to digitize that to an extent and then upload those files on the back end to whomever the brand whose coupon you're honoring is, and then settle at the end of usually at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter, depending on what the agreement may be between the brand and the retailer.
I mean, you start talking about manually working on any of this stuff, and I'm thinking about what's the average value of the average coupon, whatever, and activity-based costing and everything, and going, whoa, that may not even be worth it at some level, right? Like the coupons might be worth it in the sense that they create a sort of an incentive, but the whole thing is pretty rough. So automating that, obviously pretty important. So if we imagine, I'm just thinking through like to my way of thinking, a next step from there, we had these, on the insides of the pop bottles, there were like the little rubber, I don't know what you even call that, on the lid, and then you'd collect those or whatever. And if you got enough or you got certain kinds where you turn them in. So, if you've got a program like that, you're collecting stuff and then you turn them in every so often, you get a prize or a reward or whatever. Who's paying for that stuff to all happen, and who bears the cost? How's that work?
So very similar to the couponing type business, where you're to use the soda cap example, where you have to peel off that bonus point, and then that goes back to the brand. And so the consumer has to actually you're shifting the work away from the retailer to the consumer, who has to mail it in. So it's a little bit better for the retailer, who doesn't have to worry about that. And so what they get is the extra purchase as people are looking at this and trying to accumulate the sufficient number of points, or the right points, because sometimes you lose, you don't always win, and you need a certain number of winning capsules in order to be able to redeem a prize. So it really was, what I would call the infancy of gamification before mobile phones and certainly smartphones were available. And to some extent, that still runs in some countries around the world, but it's kind of burdensome. And it also requires some degree of manual processing on the back end for the brand to then have to open the envelopes and sort all of that, and then send the prize, whatever that prize may be, to the consumer who's made the sufficient number of points to earn that reward. So it's like a board game, old-fashioned gamification with the physical interaction between the consumer, the product, peeling off whatever label, and then sending that back in and redeeming it for the prize.
And using the example, I was thinking, I think we were talking with a guest about this a while ago, but thinking about the example of McDonald's Monopoly game, right? And one of the things that's pretty brilliant about that one is that you're in a way that feels like it's fun, you're actually making the consumer herself or himself do all the accounting for you, right? Like they're the ones that are keeping the stickers and shoving them in the right spot and all that sort of thing. You don't, so you're trying to limit, the amount of burden. There is actually a lot of activity going on there. You could even consider it friction, except for it's fun, or at least it is for some people. It was for me. And so that's an interesting, kind of a thing on the gamification. Is like, well, if you do this right, you might be able to get, you're in a perfect world, you kind of get the consumer to be almost excited about figuring out how many times they've eaten at McDonald's or how many times they've shopped at the IGA, right?
That's right. So it was really what I was talking about earlier, sort of dividing the labor up so it makes it easier for the retailer. And in this case, in terms of a QSR like McDonald's and others who have these types of activities, there still is a considerable back office cost in terms of handling the physical coupons, because those either have to be mailed back in or redeemed in store once you've completed your card And it would be the same thing for anything that has to do with having a card punched with a hole or star or stamped with a rubber stamp and the brand's logo on it. And when you have so many things, you earn a free cup of coffee. So, that might be Starbucks or in the case of Canada, Tim Hortons. But it's still labor intensive and there is a cost associated with that. And so digitizing all of that is really where things have tended to evolve since the advent of smartphones and really what I would call the use of the internet as an appliance, no longer just something that's extraordinary, but everybody uses the internet on their phone, on their tablet, or on their computer as a regular household appliance. So that's making things more efficient. And we see some evolutions that have occurred over the years in that space. Now everybody has an app. That's the issue. Every brand has an app.
And that kind of gets to in the app, and well, maybe we can jump then to, so we imagine the points that you're developing. We mentioned kind of the McDonald's, and back, still thinking about like a physical card. You put stickers on there, or you mentioned a card that gets punched. And there's some simplicity to that actually is, probably pretty good in a way, but there's just so many limitations, and to the point you made too, like some manual accounting and that kind of stuff. And so obviously there's an advantage when you move into the kind of digital world. There's a lot of things you can do you couldn't before. And we're imagining now, where credit cards come in and how cards create kind of opportunities. And then you've mentioned apps. Maybe we start with cards for starters, and then and in terms of like how this evolved, when did credit cards or card payments at all, I guess, come into play in terms of tracking, rewards and engagement, maybe with either a brand or a retailer? I think we're all familiar with, and it makes total sense to me anyway, that, I have a card and the card rewards me for using the card, because of course there's reasons why that makes sense. But then the shift some time ago was the card is gonna be a channel through which I have an incentive or a reward or whatever for doing some things in the marketplace.
Correct. And I think I would say that at the beginning, really, when a card started bringing up loyalty as a differentiator, initially it was for things that were associated with other brands. So airlines and hotels come to mind, and various card issuers partner with various airlines or hotel groups. And so a lot of people are familiar with that concept. But again, it's miles or nights or a free breakfast or whatever at the hotel you're staying at. But it still has some limitations. And from that, there's been a secondary evolution that's really gone away from the traditional points that you have to redeem in a kind of a completely proprietary loop, because you could only use those points for miles or nights or free breakfast for a hotel stay, to cash rewards. And so cash rewards have really picked up, and everybody now is issuing cash reward-based cards. And they fund those programs through the interchange fees, whether debit or credit. And all the card issuers do it. American Express, Visa, MasterCard, Discover Card, all have these type of cashback reward incentives. But those are still somewhat better than miles or points, because you can get a statement credit, or you can redeem them back as a cash transfer to your bank account, or you can also use whatever proprietary mall they may have on their consumer site when you log into your issuer's website, where they have partnered with some retailers where you can basically trade in your points for merchandise that they sponsor. It started very early on. American Express was actually one of the leaders in this space, and then all of the other card brands followed suit. Now everybody does it. So that's where the market is at in terms of the debit and credit card business now, where you can either get miles, nights, or store points, because even now you have co-branded cards with retailers that could be the Home Depot or Lane Bryant or Tractor Supply Company. They all have their Visa or MasterCard type cards, and that opens up the game a little bit for people to be able to do more things, and is more convenient because it appears on their statement, and as they log on, there are some easier ways of redeeming, but it's still somewhat in a closed loop environment.
You mentioned interchange fees, and I wanted to touch on that real quick. And just a question that I have, you had mentioned the relationship between cashback and interchange fees. And so number one, I presume that the reason that cashback has become popular is just because it has been found to be very popular with consumers, right? So I assume that that's because it drives consumer behavior the way that we want to. Is that basically the answer?
Yeah, because cash back, everybody likes cash because everybody can find a use for cash and they're not necessarily confident that they may accumulate enough points for a flight or a night. So cash back then becomes a much more attractive value proposition for the consumer, saying that, well, if I use that card a lot, I'm going to earn X% on these types of purchases. And then there are even tiers, 2% on every purchase, and then 5% for your preferred category, which may be gasoline, for example. And so as people pick the categories for which they want to get the cash back, then they can accumulate those rewards and redeem them and get the discounts that are more meaningful to them because it impacts their purchasing power directly.
So the cash back, I mean, that makes, it's fungible and it's flexible and it doesn't have, that makes all sense. And then in relation to the interchange fees are when they, for some folks anyway, when you get into it, sort of a little bit controversial because there's usually some legislative proposal floating around that might change them or whatever. But in any event, I think I'm right when I say that, number one, they're more complicated than most people think. In other words, it's like exactly what the interchange fee is varies more than you'd think. But then the other thing is that I think they are higher in the U.S. than they tend to be elsewhere. And I'm curious if that means, and we were talking just before we got on the podcast, James, about how you are a Trans-Pacific guy right now. You're working on stuff both in North America and in Australia. And so is there maybe broadly less cashback activity taking place outside the U.S. than in the U.S. because the interchange fees are lower, or is that not right?
To some extent, yes. And it will vary by country and depending on the culture and the banking regulations in various jurisdictions. But in the U.S., it's really been on the forefront of innovation in terms of developing these new products. And with regards to the interchange, there are also different sets of fees depending on whether you're using a debit card versus a credit card, because a debit card is typically backed by your checking account. And so the payment is instantaneous. There's no grace period like there is on a credit card. Whereas on a credit card, because of the grace period, which may vary anywhere between 20 to 30 days on average, there is a cost associated with that, and the interchange fees are typically higher.
Absolutely. And I know there's a very different culture in terms of the use of debit cards in some places rather than others. And I think in areas where there's a real incentive to use the credit cards, which I think correlates with the interchange fees being higher.
In the U.S., it's perhaps the market where you have the most credit card holders versus debit card holders. The debit is much more popular outside the U.S. than it is in the U.S. The banks have been pushing debit in the U.S. in an effort to minimize check usage. And it's taken some time to gain traction, but now people are comfortable using their debit card. And so when we look at all the methods and means of payments available today, they've all grown, including cash, in both relative and absolute terms. The only payment method that's a net loser year over year is the paper check. So debit card in that respect has been gaining traction, but revolving credit products, because of the exposure and the risk, is something that is not necessarily popular with banks in every country, and also because of regulatory and compliance issues with regards to consumer affairs regulations in the various jurisdictions around the world. There are some limitations as to how much revolving credit might be made available to an individual. For example, I think, and this may no longer be true, but I think at some point in Japan, you could not have more than 3 or 4 revolving credit accounts. And beyond that, that was it. Whereas in the United States, it's not uncommon for people to have multiple visas from multiple issuers, multiple MasterCards from multiple issuers, and in some cases, even co-branded American Express cards. Like, for example, a USAA Bank has an American Express card, as does Charles Schwab Bank. Those revolving credit products just represent a different risk management profile for the financial institutions that issue them.
Right, and end up with a lot more cards in the wallet for folks in the U.S. especially, and then it's a battle to try and get the card that you've issued, whatever institution you're coming from, to be the preferred one. And of course, that sets the competitive context against which presumably you've got cash back and all of that that'll drive people's behavior.
Yeah, cash back, and then obviously for our American listeners, everybody's familiar with the infamous balance transfer offers that people get either online or in their regular paper mail. So there's a lot of competition because everybody wants to have on their portfolio people who carry a balance. A credit card user that doesn't carry a balance is a less attractive credit card user, although a lower risk credit card user than one who does carry a balance, provided that person is able to make the payments. Then that becomes an attractive value proposition for the financial institution that issues the card. And we didn't see financial institutions getting out of the business for whatever reason, and where their credit card portfolio was basically up for sale and bundled up for another issuer to pick it up because people wanted to have that high interest debt on their books because of the people not able to pay up their balances in full was a good recurring source of revenue.
I think we saw the news item was last week maybe that the credit card debt in the U.S. had just popped up above $1 trillion, I think it was, because I think it had been like 900 and something billion.
$1 trillion with the T. So people in the United States carry an awful lot of credit card debt. The average household carries well over $5,000 in card debt.
In historical context, apparently, and this is based on the articles I read about it, in historical context, it's not as alarming as it sounds. Anything that starts with a T, $1 trillion, sounds like a lot of money, and it is, to be sure, but it's apparently against the backdrop of kind of some of the fundamentals, it's not as concerning. Well, on the cards, merchant-funded or card-linked offers, come in, and as you may know, Digital Commerce Alliance was founded originally in 2014 as the CardLinx Association because it really was originally focused on card linking. And that sort of started off in different places around the world in a way that created some more options. And would love to get your sense of, what kind of did CLO or card-linked offers create that couldn't be done before?
Well, so card linking is a very interesting technology. It's an implementation value proposition more than it is a shiny new thing. So it depends on how you are going to use your card linking, because you could use your card linking for any number of purposes. But what we are looking at, we think card linking is another way of basically innovating and revolutionizing charitable contributions and loyalty programs, simply because it makes it far more accessible for people once they link a card to a loyalty program to manage those rewards and as many cards as they may wish to link. If they have the right platform, then it enables them to keep inside one wallet all of those cash equivalent rewards in a single place from which to manage and allocate how they want to use those cash rewards. So it can be for themselves. They want to save to make a large purchase and accumulate enough cash rewards and bundle all those cash rewards from the various cards they may have linked and make that purchase. They may want to redeem it, and oftentimes they do redeem it with the merchant that is sponsoring the loyalty program. Usually about 80% of the time, the earn and burn happens internally. But it also gives them the option of using their points elsewhere in a more open ecosystem. And that's what's new. That's what's sort of counterintuitive for loyalty programs, old-style loyalty programs, which is why would I allow people to use my rewards points for purchases elsewhere? Although it is counterintuitive, what you find out is that when retailers, and this is what we've been starting to see in Australia, allow this to happen, it develops brand loyalty, because all of a sudden it says, yes, I don't use all my reward points at that same retailer, but I will keep going back to that retailer and make purchases because that retailer enables me, empowers me to use my points in a way that I want, and it's not necessarily tied to making purchases with those points at that retailer. I may use them differently. And that's where the advantage comes in with card linking as an enabling technology, where the card becomes a backup that is equivalent to the loyalty program. So you associate your card with that loyalty program, and every time you use that card, you're earning points in that loyalty program with that merchant who funds the program. And as a result of that, typically increases the value of the average basket by anywhere between 5 to 6% per receipt in that store, and develops loyalty and word of mouth that other people then also want to jump in and join in the program because of its flexibility.
I mean, in a way, it's a synthetic. One of the ways I think about this, and tell me if this seems right or if there's more nuance here, but it's a synthetic way or a virtual way of creating a store branded card. Now, there's a bunch of things that are different there about it, but in a way, right? If it's an open enrollment kind of a thing, or if it's I could just enroll any card into the thing or link any card, then in my mind anyway, it's connected to that retailer, even though it's not branded with the retailer.
Correct. So I'll give you an example. You could have an airline branded credit card issued by a bank, and you could use that card to make purchases, and you would still earn your miles. That doesn't change. On the other hand, when you link that same card to a loyalty program that is funded by a merchant, you're earning extra cash rewards with that merchant, separate and distinctly from the miles that you might be earning with your airline branded card. So it allows the consumer, by using the same card, to basically double dip. I'm earning miles and I'm earning cash. But I'm earning cash not from my card issuer, I'm earning cash from the merchant whose loyalty program I linked my card to.
Yeah. And there's a lot more there, I think, that can happen in that space when you start to, see, that's sort of the base case in a way, right? And I'd be interested to get your sense of where you think it can be headed, because I think with a lot of the developments we've seen in the digital commerce space, you mentioned apps before, we haven't gotten into that too much, but it seems like there's a lot of possibilities here that go well beyond the original kind of use cases.
Correct, because even the apps, if you have to have an app for every loyalty program out there, that's a lot of apps to manage on your device, right? So you may have a McDonald's app, you may have a Burger King. I'll be fair with the brands. I'll cite both big burger chains.
I'm an equal opportunity guy on that stuff, and if there's hamburgers, I'm there basically. So I'm for it. We could also throw in, I don't know, In-N-Out, Wendy's, all of it.
Yeah, exactly. So you have that app and you can redeem, et cetera. And it does a pretty good job within that brand's ecosystem for people earning and redeeming, but it's still earn and burn in a proprietary environment. Even though it's been digitized, it's still proprietary and it limits what you can use those rewards for. So the question then becomes, okay, how many points can I earn and how many burgers can I eat in a year or in a month? And that makes sense for me to go back every time and use those points in a way that is somewhat limited because it's only for product at that particular franchise outlet.
You mentioned digital wallets, and it's a long way from walking through the aisles of the IGA with a Maxwell House coupon, right? In terms of what's possible there, right? So once we start to live in the world of maybe the general digital wallet, I don't know. I wonder what you think about that, because when I talk to folks about digital wallets, I think that term's getting used in a few different ways. I think of my Apple Wallet because I've kind of managed to get a lot of stuff on there on my iPhone. But there's also proprietary digital wallets that are being created within apps that maybe have a narrower use, or maybe they're intended to have a broad use. And so right now it feels like it's kind of like the early days. I mean, in a sense, it's the early days for digital wallets, but it's growing fast, right?
It is. And I would say Apple got a head start on everybody because they created their own ecosystem and they basically signed up every card issuer brand and logo, right? So you can put any number of cards in your Apple Wallet, but you're still tied to using that card in a traditional way, in fact, because what your Apple Wallet does is becomes a substitute for the plastic card. So you're not displacing cash necessarily as much as you're not pulling a plastic card out of your wallet, you're just tapping your phone. So that provides an added degree of convenience. It even provides an added degree of security because the card number in the Apple Wallet is not the same as the one that is on your physical card, but at the same time, it has its limitations.
It feels like the possibility maybe somewhere in all of this for simplification from a consumer's perspective. And it's hard to imagine that, I guess, in a way, because everything we're talking about is about new possibilities and new things and everything. And that, of course, results in a situation where, from the consumer perspective, I think if I put my consumer hat on, right, the frustration is, man, I got you alluded to this earlier, I got a lot of different apps on my phone. And in truth, I don't open them as I can guarantee you I don't open them as often as the retailers would like or the brands would like, right? Because there's so much going on. And so then you say, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe if there was more action in a central wallet of some kind, maybe that's sort of the beginning of a solution. But I just wonder what you think, James, like in terms of where this heads. So if we let's just put it this way. If we're sitting here 5 years from now and the complexity has been reduced and consumers are happier with stuff because it's easier to manage than it was way back in 2023, like how's that going to happen?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't have a crystal ball, but my sense is that digital wallets will still continue to play a very important role going forward, but they will most likely evolve to be less proprietary. And less proprietary in terms of being able to aggregate points from multiple card brands and card issuers as well as retailers, and providing the consumer with a better way to have a 360-degree view of all their rewards in one place and be able to then decide how they want to allocate those rewards across the board. So this is exactly what we're trying to do with Points for Purpose and why we launched last June in the United States, simply because it makes it easier to have a single repository view of everything that you do with the cards that you decide to link to that wallet and allow you to use points any which way you want without being tied to a particular brand.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you came back to Points for Purpose, and because I think it's a great example of using in an extremely sort of flexible way, or at least getting after some of the great possibilities of using the card linking, because it sort of maximizes consumer choice, right? In terms of saying, hey, I'm really excited about, I don't know if it's the Epilepsy Foundation or some cause that I'm interested in, but it's not just that, right? It could be something else, another thing you're trying to achieve. And so, hopefully it gets me more excited about using a particular payment form because I've connected it in.
That's right. Although that is a new way of looking at things and somewhat counterintuitive, as I mentioned before, it doesn't take away from the existing programs that are out there. You can still use your cards in the traditional loyalty card issuer type of ecosystem. It just enables you to use that same card to earn loyalty elsewhere. So your airline mileage card issuer won't see that those loyalty points revert back to them because they're not funding the program. So you will still earn your miles the traditional way, but because you're linking your card, you will also earn points with whomever you linked your card to in terms of the loyalty program that you're interested in. And that also enables you to basically have a lot more flexibility. And when it comes to charitable contributions, which is really sort of where I came into this in my conversations with the founder of Points for Purpose, Ivan Schwartz, and when I started having these conversations with them, having been in the business of banking and cards and ATMs most of my career, there was something I wanted to do that was different in terms of, okay, how can I use my knowledge of this industry to contribute something back that is more than just business? How can you put a profit to purpose? And there's nothing wrong with making a profit, with making a buck. And so that's why initially our tagline was the loyalty platform that gives you more or that gives back. And then we didn't quite ring right. It was simplified into get more, give more, because when people have access to more cash, to more financial resources, they're more inclined to share, to spread some of that around. And it doesn't have to be in huge amounts. And this is a term that was coined by one of our technical partners that happens to be a Canadian company, which they called microphilanthropy. Because if you give even $1 and 1 million people give $1, it's the same as a big corporation writing $1 million check to a charity. And so it enables people to be more generous without breaking the bank, so to speak, because they don't have to go and dig in their wallet and put something in a bucket. They don't have to go to a website and give $25 on their debit or credit card or write a check and put it in the mail. All they need to do is use their card and then decide what percentage of their cash rewards they're willing to give back to a cause of their choice. And that way they have a direct accountability. They see where every dollar they contribute goes.
Your comment resonates with me, James, about there's $1 million donation from the company. There's a $1 million $1 donations from people. And to me, it just highlights the importance of easy, which is to say that, if you're going to make $1 million donation, obviously there's going to be at least a few meetings and it'll be a little involved, but that makes sense. It's $1 million or even more, or whatever. On the other hand, people are very willing to give $1, something that they believe in, or even something that looks roughly good, right? But you have to make it really easy. And I think that's the critical point here, is to say like, hey, how do we facilitate, how do we grease the skids, make it as easy as possible? And then sure, people will give $1, right? If you do that. That's kind of what this is about at some level, is you're sitting back there trying to engineer against the backdrop of what is still ultimately even a more complicated system than I think a lot of people appreciate, to make that complexity go away so that the consumer experience is, hey, this is easy to do.
Yeah, it has to be seamless. So, the consumer has to link their card. They can link several cards if they so choose. And based on what they use those cards for, earn their classical rewards with the card issuer. And at the same time, earn these extra cash rewards with the merchant-funded loyalty program. In discussions we've had with some retailers, we're even looking at incentivizing the consumer by saying, for every $1 you give, we'll give a matching contribution of $1 as well, up to whatever that $1 million number is. Is it 1 million, 2 million, et cetera? And so that provides a leverage effect in addition to corporate giving and to charitable organizations and causes, whichever they may be. And they can be national, they can be global, but they can also be extremely local. It can be hyper-localized. It could be for something as simple as a nonprofit organization sponsoring a youth sports club for after-school programs that is more meaningful to you in your immediate community. So we can go from global to hyper-local, and that can be tailored very easily. We remove that friction. The only thing the consumer has to do is pick what cause they want to support, and then go shop.
I was reading a piece this morning kind of about the demonstrated efficacy of matching gifts as a sort of technique for driving giving, and so that's an interesting example there in the retail context. And then there, I think it's a matter of making sure that the retailers can sort of control it, like they can kind of manage or target it or whatever, as far as how much money is being spent, and that they've got enough, I guess, analysis or market intelligence to be able to make sure that they're not completely upside down on the whole thing, right? So that they know that it's working for them and the consumer and the charity.
Correct. It has to be a win-win-win solution. So for the retailer, it means more sales, and they might even put some additional incentives with promos on products with higher margins for a boost, supporting a particular featured cause. And what we found out is if you give people too many choices, it's difficult for them to make a choice. So typically we would encourage the loyalty program hosts to feature causes. And there are two ways of doing it. You can do that by having a boardroom meeting and say, we're going to support this cause, that cause, and this cause, and sort of push it down the line to your loyalty program members. Or you can reach out to your loyalty program members and say, here are the causes we're featuring, but we would like to know some of the causes that you're interested in supporting within your community. So even with a big brand retailer, supermarket, et cetera, they can have nationally featured causes that they support, but they can also encourage at a local level consumers down to the zip code to support a very local cause. And so we recommend usually featuring no more than 3 causes and working with the consumers to determine, what's the cause of the month or the cause of the quarter that you want to support locally. And of course, you can modulate that in a variety of ways, but that's basically the essence of being able to have a much more meaningful impact in your local community as a brand that is trying to develop loyalty in small town America, for example, where a lot of people sort of feel that they're being overlooked.
That's a great point. I do think much as you want to give people choice, and it's important for it to always be there, there's an aspect of leadership of helping people to get excited about or motivated about something that, we're going to do together. Like that's what community is, and that's kind of what leadership is. And so finding that balance and then seizing those opportunities when they come up is great. And so I will, you mentioned win-win-win. So I'll say that's the three-way Pareto optimal exchange, right? You guys are in the business of trying to create probably maybe more directions than just three even, but just experiences for consumers that benefit, obviously a variety of parties in the commercial marketplace, but also, charities. And that's the sort of founding motivation of Points for Purpose.
Yes, we all have sort of personal histories and personal backgrounds that motivated us in developing this concept. And, I'm a latecomer to Points for Purpose. But when I was approached, that was exactly what attracted me to it. It was not just to make a buck, but it was like, how can I give a buck back? And if I can contribute to a business that helps people in their local community, then I'm making a difference by doing something that's positive and by enabling commerce to occur the normal way with the least friction possible. Actually, I would say even frictionless. Once you've done the initial card linking, that's it.
Terrific. Well, look, that's maybe a great place to leave it, James. I appreciate the conversation. I will say for people that are listening that your commentary and your kind of the things that you post on LinkedIn are particularly insightful, I'll say. And I think you spend a bit more time there than I do. I should be on there a little more. Maybe I should just be following the things that you say. But in any event, I knew that you were a wealth of information on this stuff and really grateful for your time today and having this conversation with us.
Hey, Dan, it was a pleasure and an honor. And I was very happy to be able to have this conversation with you today.
Commerce Code is brought to you in part by VantageScore. 9 of the top 10 banks and over 3,000 leading banks and fintechs use VantageScore to predict and manage repayment risk. Learn more about the latest advances in credit scoring and how to grow your lending business by leveraging financial inclusion at VantageScore.com.
Okay, I promised at the outset a postscript on the state of the mall. Coresight Research has released a really interesting document. You can easily find it in Google, titled The State of the American Mall, Competitive, Attractive, and Here to Stay. I think we've all seen some challenges that malls have had, and so the optimism in that title might be a little bit overblown, but they make some good points. A couple of just elements from the study. From 21 to 22, retail sales at malls increased 11% to over $800 billion. Comparing to 2021, maybe we're coming back from COVID, et cetera, so who knows about that. But to me, a more compelling point was at top tier malls, the most elite ones, or expensive anyway ones, comparing 2019 to 2022, foot traffic was up 12%. That's something, I think, when you're looking at 2019. So e-commerce didn't kill them all. Customers basically want both. Brands are now doing omni-channel marketing, so nearly everyone does both online shopping and in-person shopping, so brands have to be everywhere. And then if you put this against the backdrop of commercial real estate more broadly, office vacancy rates obviously are huge, but according to CBRE, CB Richard Ellis, this is a commercial real estate management firm, the vacancy rate for retail space is 4.8%. The vacancy rate for offices is enormous, basically. I don't know if it's 25 or 30%, I think they said. 4.8% is the lowest level of vacancy. That's the retail space vacancy rate since they started tracking it 18 years ago. Maybe some of the leftover office space gets converted to retail. Not that would work for very much of it or be easy to do. But the point is, affordable space might be coming online from the office side. There's still a lot of interest in having in-person shops available. So I wanted to reflect a little bit on transition and change in the following way. A couple of examples. We had horses for, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of years as a form of transportation. Bicycles did not get rid of horses. Cars did-ish. But what I would say is that cars didn't get rid of bicycles completely, and they didn't get rid of horses either, in the sense that they continue to play a role. So that's one way in which you can have incremental movement. And who knows what comes after cars, is that you keep everything, and then they play a smaller role. Another example would be, we moved from a variety of different forms of writing, from scrolls, and there's vellum, to books, and books were a big development. And then, of course, it was the printing press. We didn't really have books, the codex, stuff that was put together in what we would call a book, until much later in history than I think we tend to think. And then the book has been pretty dominant format, and then we moved to ebooks. At this point, I think it's pretty obvious that ebooks have not and will not really, in the long run, displace hard copy books. Books, magazines, other printed material apparently will continue to play not just a minor role like horses in transportation these days, but a pretty big role in communication, even as more and more communication obviously takes place electronically. I have a printer at home. I use it not much. So there's been a change, but books are still there. So what are malls for, right? So we have malls, we have stores, we have malls, we have e-commerce. What happens? All these words are to lead up to the following point. Co-location is a really interesting behavioral and economic phenomenon, and malls exist to better manage co-location. Now, of course, you could argue at the very beginning, and I know this living in Minnesota, that the first mall, the first indoor mall anyway, Southdale in Edina, Minnesota, was to better manage winter. Okay, fair enough. And it worked. Mall of America is also here for a reason, and another one of the world's biggest malls is in Edmonton, also for that reason. But it's managing weather, it's managing co-location in that context. Co-location is a funny thing. Co-location happens on its own because businesses benefit from common locations in a bunch of different ways. And so you can think on the retail side in terms of Seville Row, or there's German Street just down the road from Seville Row. Does the same thing. Rodeo Drive in Los Angeles, whatever. You can also think in terms of Silicon Valley and Wall Street. That's more talent co-location. You can think in terms of other examples of where industries all cluster in the same general place. And pretty much every metro area, has certain industries that dominate. So on the retail side, business owners tend to be afraid of co-location. So my barber, this is like 10 years ago, was so terrified of a hair salon moving in next door that he literally left for another location. I tried to convince him otherwise, but he probably would have been better off staying. It would have made that little intersection in St. Paul, Minnesota, a bit of a destination for that kind of stuff. And that tends to be good. That's how Seville Row happens, right? A bunch of people just pop up in the same place, and it creates success because it allows basically more awareness and also for people to go shopping all in one place and look at a bunch of stores. That actually works well. Well, the mall is just a more orderly way of doing Seville Row, and you can kind of help the stores to thrive and survive by having common standards for how you do things in a mall. So that's the idea. Now, if stores are going to survive e-commerce and thrive during the period of e-commerce, then it stands to reason they probably will do so by continuing to co-locate in an orderly way. I think malls probably can facilitate that as they have in the past. And part of that, in all likelihood, is more sophisticated omni-channel marketing, right? And of course, the bigger the mall is, the more likely it is to have its own marketing budget and staff. That's been true for a long time. The Mall of America or the West Edmonton Mall or whatever, pick your big mall, Wooddale or something, has had their own marketing platform in addition to the marketing that the stores all have and that the brands have around them. And so even more so, perhaps going forward, we might see that in a more sophisticated approach. It's pretty hard to replicate that kind of thing if all you've got is a city street with a bunch of shops, even if they're in the same industry. So I'm not sure if Seville Row has its own marketing association. If it does, I'm not sure I'd want to be in charge of that thing. It's hard to corral organizations if they didn't have to sign on to certain conditions on the front end. The mall has the benefit of that as a landlord. And what I mean by that is if you're a place that's been on Seville Row for 300 years or something, you can voluntarily join the Common Marketing Association, but you can also quit anytime and they probably have no power over you. Whereas at a mall, on the front end, everybody has to sign up to certain conditions in terms of how they'll operate. And I would conjecture that going forward, some of that will be participation in certain online marketing and multimodal or omni-channel marketing practices that malls will probably need to roll out in order to compete with each other and also compete in the e-commerce environment. So I do expect to see some more of that, and that it could be that part of the renaissance of the mall looking forward is their ability to help stores coordinate more effectively, not just in terms of branding and signage and some of the stuff that they've done and placement of stores, make sure that they're, have different areas of the mall that do certain things, but also that they can better coordinate and support omni-channel marketing experiences that shoppers are having and that shoppers will increasingly demand. So looking forward to seeing what happens with the malls, and especially interested to see who's going to innovate and be the leader on that stuff. Maybe it'll be Mall of America up here, or maybe it'll be somebody else that comes up with the right way to do it. Maybe it's app-based, maybe it's not. We'll see.
Commerce Code is a bi-weekly podcast bringing you conversations with executives who are leading the way in digital commerce. If you like Commerce Code, your company should join the Digital Commerce Alliance and become part of our mission of advancing trade for good through standard setting, industry networking, conferences, and best practice sharing. Check out our website at www.digcomall.org. On behalf of DCA, have a great week.